Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for coming to our Zoom chat tonight with Chris Sorensen. We're really curious, actually, how you heard about this webinar. Did you hear about it from the APA newsletter? Did you hear about it from my Develop Photography newsletter? Did you hear about it from PBS's All Arts website? Let us know, put right in the chat box if you can, right in the chat box how you heard about this talk, because it'll help us figure out, what works. But thank you all for coming. For those of you not familiar, I'm sure some of you are members of APA and some of you probably are not. APA is New York. APA New York is the Northeast region chapter of American Photographic Artists. We are the country's leading nonprofit advocacy group for commercial photographers. We organize events, negotiate benefits for our members, hold seminars, advocate for better laws for freelancers, promote our members' work. So we organize photo contests and so much more. Basically, the APA's mission is we want to help photographers become successful. Our goal is to establish and endorse and promote professional practices and standards and ethics in the photography community. And we seek to mentor and motivate and educate members to pursue excellence and champion those photographers. So if you're not a member, we hope you'll think about joining us. We have members at all different levels that start at $50 a year, and we'd love for you to join us. This event tonight is co-sponsored by APA New York and also the Develop Photography newsletter and the Portfolio Development Program, which is now run, now based, I should say, at Soho Photo Gallery. Soho Photo Gallery is a fabulous not-for-profit gallery downtown. It's actually in Tribeca, not Soho. But if you've never been there, you have no idea what you're missing. Definitely go down there. The shows change every few weeks. They have fantastic shows there, and drop by. It's a great artistic resource in New York, and great to support. As I mentioned earlier, but we have more people in the room now. We have great upcoming events. On February 6th is our next event. It's an in-person event, actually at Soho Photo Gallery. We appreciate them allowing us to have our event there. It's called No More Starving Artists, Attracting Clients Who Value What You Do. And the link to register is on the APA New York website, and I'll drop it in the chat box as well so you can see it. So Chris Sorensen, our speaker for tonight. We're so happy and so grateful that he is speaking for APA New York again. Actually, he's not really speaking for APA New York. He's speaking for all of you to give back to the community. And as I had mentioned in the blurb for this class, when we had our recent week-long photography show in December, Chris was one of the speakers, and he gave such a kick-ass talk about personal projects. I've heard all kinds of talks about personal projects, and they're all good in different ways, but a lot of them tend to be about like a slideshow of my vacation kind of thing. But Chris went into so much into his thought process and everything, and his intention and everything. It was just fantastic. And I thought, that was in person in December. And so I think we had about 50 people there. And I thought more people need to see this. And I wanted the people who are part of the portfolio development program, especially to hear it, because they're about to embark on doing personal projects. And so I asked him if he'd speak again on Zoom so more people could hear. And he said yes. So we're very grateful. And Chris is a New York-based photographer shooting celebrity and editorial portraiture, travel, documentary. He's also a travel and documentary photographer. And he was lucky to escape the corporate world and find photography, where he gets to make pictures of interesting faces and beautiful places. And he's been privileged to be selected for American Photography 6 times, chosen for Communication Arts Photo Annual 4 times, including Best in Show in 2022, awarded the International Photography Awards, honored by PDN. May it rest in peace, PDN, and recognized by APA, which is us. And he has a great who's who of clients. very impressive list of clients, and we're really thrilled to have him here speaking. And so without further ado, before we get started, I just wanted to say, if you have questions as we're going along, put them in the Q&A or in the chat box, and I will ask some questions as we're going along, but most, won't interrupt him a lot. Certain questions that pertain to what he's talking about, we'll get your questions in, and then we'll have a more formal Q&A after his talk. So anything you see you'd like to ask about as we're going along, definitely type it in the Q&A or in the chat box. So without further ado, Chris Sorensen.
Thank you, and thank you, APA, and thank you everybody for coming. I'm honored to be able to give this presentation again. Personal projects are something that's very near and dear to my heart, because honestly, I would not have a career without personal projects. And we're going to get into that through the presentation, but it's something that I'm really passionate about, and hopefully that comes across in the next hour and a half. And as she said, there will be a Q&A at the end, but so many times questions are much more useful and valuable in the moment when you have the image up or you've been recently talking about something, as opposed to 40 minutes later at the end or whatever it may be. So if there is a question, like she said, just put it in the chat, and if it's something that she thinks is good, and she'll stop me or interject with that question. And with that, let's start with sharing the screen and get into it. Growing your career through creativity, or growing your career and creativity with personal projects is what we're going to be talking about today. And for about the first half of it, it's going to be mostly about the how and why of personal projects, and how you can use that to help further your career and your talents and your skills. And then at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit more about something that I find valuable when I go and listen to photographers, which is the creativity, more of the why of images rather than the how. So let's get going here. So about me. What do I shoot? As she said, I mainly shoot celebrity and editorial portraiture. Nick Jonas for the cover of American Way, Samin Nasrat for Money, John Leguizamo, shot him actually a couple different times. And then obviously with editorial photography, portraiture, you're not always shooting celebrities, you're shooting people who have just done something of note. And, people here like Drew Dixon, Jonathan Silverstein, that kind of work is what I probably do 80% of my shoots. I also shoot travel. Bogota for Hemispheres, Chile for Rhapsody, Nova Scotia for Hemispheres again, Hong Kong and Shanghai for Boston Magazine, California for Hong Kong Tatler, and then for a European travel magazine, shooting about New York, since I live here. And also I've ended up shooting a fair amount of documentary work, a story on CTE for Washington Post Magazine, behind the scenes of My Fair Lady with Laura Benanti for Washington Post, NGO work in Cambodia, and NGO work in Nepal. So I shoot a bunch of different stuff, and one of the things I always talk about, even though it's not necessarily tied specifically to personal projects, but I like to bring up, is that you don't always have to shoot just one thing. When I was starting out in photography, I'm self-taught, I started photography late in life as a third career, actually. And so I was going to see people, in seminars and webinars like this, and watching YouTube videos, and going to portfolio reviews and talking to editors and other people. And one of the things I would hear occasionally, and probably more than I would like to hear, is that, oh, you have to focus on one thing. You got to do just portraiture. You can't do portraiture and something else, because clients and the people who hire you, they need to know what you do. And that may be true for some people, but I got to say, you don't have to do it that way. If you have a passion for shooting more than one thing, then shoot it. It's possible. I'm doing it, and other people have as well. So I always just like to say, shoot what you love, and if that's more than just one thing, that's fine. Don't limit yourself just because some people, may say that's the way that you're supposed to do it. And the other thing is you don't have to just shoot things one way. I've had people tell me not only should I just be shooting portraiture, I've had people tell me that you should only shoot it in one particular style so that they know what they're going to hire you for. I mean, there are a lot of great photographers out there that have a very distinctive style, and I love and respect their work, but that is not who I want to be or what I want to shoot. If I had to shoot everything in the same way for the rest of my career, I wouldn't be a photographer probably anymore, because I wouldn't love it the way I do now. Shooting a bunch of different things in a bunch of different ways exercises my creativity. It makes photography exciting for me. So just one way I always like to start out, just telling people, something from my own personal background that may be different than what you've heard before. So having done that, how I got into photography. Now, I just mentioned a second ago that I got into photography late in life. And that is the third career. I bought my first camera at age 40. I worked in finance for 12 years right out of college. I grew up very poor, and I always had an artistic bent, though I always thought it was going to be creative writing, novels, short stories. So when I went to college, I was an English major and business double major, and I said I would get a real job right on the side until I had saved up enough money and then go pursue my artistic ambitions. And thankfully that worked. I quit after 12 years in finance, moved to New York, went to NYU to study screenwriting, and took an acting class just to help my writing, not because I wanted to act. After 6 months of doing that, because acting was fun and social as opposed to writing with an empty computer screen, my acting teacher said, you need to get headshots. You're not going to progress anymore, and I'm not going to teach you unless you can start auditioning, have headshots. So I went and got headshots, which is actually my only second exposure in my life to professional photography after my senior pictures in high school. And I started booking things and booking commercials and stuff. And so I kept pursuing the acting. And, in New York, if you're working on an acting job for a commercial, a lot of times you'll also be doing the print job. If you get hired for a Citibank commercial, they're also shooting a Citibank ad at the same time. So I ended up with a modeling agent on these photo shoots. And going back to, I always being a business and English major, I always kind of had a technical and a creative side, and watching these photographers and their assistants on set, I was very intrigued because it kind of tickled both sides of my brain. There was obviously the technical and, business side of it, but there was also a very creative side. So I bought a camera at age 40, started shooting my model and actor friends. They started using them, and their agents started reaching out to me. And suddenly I had this hobby, a side gig as a headshot and model test photographer. Now I go through all of this to say that there are a lot of different ways to get into photography. And just like there's no rules that you have to, focus on just one type of photography or shooting things in one way, you also don't have to follow the normal ways to get into photography. There's all different ways to get into photography. You don't have to assist. You don't have to go to school for photography. You don't have to know what you want to do right away. Like I said, I bought my first camera at 40. You don't have to be successful young. You can start at any time, and you can move from one type of photography for another. There's way more flexibility in this profession than you might think. And I think doing it the way you love is probably more likely to lead to your success, because passion is a big part of what leads to success. And that is part of why I think we're going to be talking about personal projects today, because so many of them are passion projects. So going back to what I was just talking, where did I start? Like I said, with headshots, just natural light, just your basic headshots for actors. I bought my first camera in 2008. And so from like 2008 to 2011, those 3 years were when I was acting and modeling, and photography was this kind of a side business. And so I was shooting those headshots. I was doing lifestyle tests, model tests, once again, all natural light. And then I started to branch in, even shooting the models, like, I should try shooting some beauty. And this is when I actually first started getting into working with lighting. You can see some of the images here. Now, I like doing this, but there's a difference between liking what you're doing and loving what you're doing. And I very quickly decided that I didn't want to make pretty pictures of pretty people as a photographer. I'd much rather make interesting pictures of interesting people. So now we're going to talk about this. This is, I already started without it. How do I got there from there to today? And so knowing that I wanted to shoot editorial work, I started doing it, basically assigning myself editorial projects. And why did I do this? Because I wanted to do a couple different things. I wanted to build a portfolio. And this, I mean, these things are, I mean, not just what I do, but why personal projects are good for anybody. Secondly, personal projects give you an outlet to fulfill your creativity. I mean, as a working photographer, now, no matter how often you're working, you're probably not working as much as you would like. And so personal projects give you the opportunity to do things that you may not get to do on assignment, and do things when you're not being paid to do things, when you're not getting those calls. So it gives you an opportunity to fill your time. And it gives you an opportunity to generate new work, to put on Instagram, to put on your website, to show in portfolio reviews, because you always need to be showing new work so that you can keep in front of people like you're basically a working photographer. Even if you're maybe aren't, you know, you can kind of fake it till you make it by doing these personal projects and you know, showing it, you know, you look like you're out there making work all the time. Also, it's a great way to develop and practice skills, which is one of the things that I used it, especially at the beginning for, even most recently with my wife during quarantine project. And sometimes you just have to, like I was talking a second ago about passion projects. There's some things that a story you just have to tell. And actually the best personal projects are the personal projects, excuse me a second, my computer is about to die because it became unplugged. There we go. Sorry about that. I didn't notice that the plug had come out of the wall. The best personal projects are those that hit a number of these things, where it's a project you love, you just have to do it. It also allows you to develop new skills, try new things, exercise your creativity, and, you know, maybe build a portfolio that you wouldn't have that allows you to get work that you want to be doing. So any of these is a reason by itself. It's even better if there's multiple reasons. So one of the reasons that you often won't hear about personal projects is why you need to do them. Your potential clients expect you to. Every time I go to a portfolio review, one of the things every editor, creative at an agency, et cetera, asks is, so what are you working on personally? Or what are you working on for yourself? Because from their perspective, you know, if they're at a portfolio review and let's say they do lifestyle work, they're going to see 20 lifestyle photographers that day, and they're all going to make great lifestyle work. And it's all just going to blend together. So obviously you have to have that in your portfolio if that's the work you want to do. But, you know, that's kind of the minimum expectation. The expectation that they really want to see fulfilled is what you're doing when it's on your, when you're on your own, when it's what you love, when it's your passion. They want to see the stuff that makes you excited, and hopefully that excites them too. Now, the other thing is there's about personal projects and why is there's one person I will always know will hire me, and that is me. So you are your best client. If you see work out there that you want to be making and no one's hiring you for it, go and make it. You know, show the work that you want to be making, make it, and then show it to people. So what can be personal projects? A lot of times people have this opinion of personal projects being, it's got to be this huge long-term project, or it's got to be something important or whatever. It doesn't. I mean, anything. I mean, obviously those can be personal projects and often are, but, you know, single events can be personal project, a social cultural movement, personal assignments, topics, you know, they can be long-term, they can be one day off. There's no limitation to what can be personal projects. And one of the things, like for me is, you know, I was at a, well, actually the week of the APA gallery show, gallery, they were talking to some photographers, and they were talking about tests. And I was just like, oh, I haven't done tests in a long time, but what they were really talking about was a personal project. They just framed it as, you know, tests, because that's, you know, the language that we've used for a long time. But I've, you know, ever since I stopped doing model tests, I don't refer to things as tests anymore, because I think it kind of diminishes it. Because if I'm doing something, whether it's a day at an event to shoot portraits or street portraits or anything like that, it's not a test. I am doing something to build my skill set, to build my portfolio. It's, to get work. It's a personal project. It is something that is improving my skill set, my personal business, et cetera. So I think, looking at things as personal projects can be anything from one-offs, little, quick things to long-term things. And the other thing with personal projects is, I've had this, and I'm going to talk about one in just a second. Don't be afraid to start. Sometimes it can be overwhelming thinking about, oh, it's a long-term project, or you have to get out there if you're not used to interacting with people as much. Like, it's easy to find excuses not to get out there, but don't be afraid to start. Get out there and do it. Force yourself, and then it gets easier after that. But conversely, don't be afraid to stop. There have been things that I have started at a certain point, they stop basically bringing me joy. I mean, I'm a photographer today because it was a hobby that became a passion, that became a career. And I love it because I love doing it and it makes me excited. At the point that it doesn't do that anymore, I'm like, okay, this isn't worth it anymore. That doesn't mean when it gets tough, stop. When it becomes not valuable anymore, then don't be afraid to stop. All right, so we talked about where I started with the headshots and model tests, et cetera, the lifestyle work. I knew in my head I wanted to go from pretty pictures of pretty people to interesting pictures of interesting people, but I didn't have that in my portfolio. So I did what I considered an editorial portrait project, where basically what I did is I sent out an email to a bunch of friends saying, hey, I'm doing this project. Hopefully some of you will agree to participate, where I will come to your house, your apartment, and all I need is an hour of your time. And most of that time, I'm not even going to need you. I'm just going to show up there with my backpack and my rolly bag, and I'm going to look around and figure out how I'm going to shoot you, where I'm going to shoot you, how I'm going to light it. And then, for like the last 20 minutes, I'm going to need you. And then that's it. And the whole intent of this was basically to make it exactly like I was shooting an editorial assignment. And having been in front of the camera, I kind of knew, having gotten modeling jobs for editorial magazines and editorial photographers before, the nature of this stuff. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I basically said, I'm going to do that. And I'm going to structure it from how I'm shooting it to how I am timing it and how I am doing everything, just like I would an editorial shoot. So I would go to my friend's place and just, take the hour, half hour to figure things out, half hour to shoot. And what this gave me was a portfolio that allowed me to show that I could do this work. It gave me a comfort with the process of doing this, showing up to some place I've never been, to meet somebody I don't know maybe very well, and having to come out with an image in a confined amount of time. And so all of these images were from that project. And as I said earlier, basically make the work you want to be hired for. And I wanted to start doing this work. So I basically assigned myself to make that work. So that was kind of my first project. And like I said, that was a project to kind of give me the skill set and build the portfolio, going back to that list of why you do personal projects. Fulton Street was a project that was basically from the heart, a project that you do because you have to do it. I was living at the time in Bed-Stuy in an artist building there. And this was in, like I said, 2008 to 2011. And the neighborhood was gentrifying, and all the amazing faces and people that I had seen there over my time there were slowly getting pushed out of the neighborhood. So I had this idea that I would do a street portrait project, kind of like Abaddon's Into the West, Into the American West, on the street, and basically capture the faces that were getting pushed out of the neighborhood. So, and going back to like, don't be afraid to start. This is the one I was afraid to start because I was living in Bed-Stuy, and Bed-Stuy is an overwhelmingly Black neighborhood, and I was a white guy. And so, I was doing the genesis of this project was the gentrification of the neighborhood, but to a lot of people there, I was probably part of the gentrification. So for the longest time, this was in 2011, I was basically looking for excuses not to shoot this. The weather wasn't perfect, XYZ, I wasn't feeling great. And every different reason, I kept pushing it until one day I went out there and it was just a perfect day. There was no longer any excuses. And I said, if I'm not going to shoot it today, then I'm never going to shoot this. So I went out there and taped a piece of seamless to the side of a building and asked somebody as they walked by, hey, do you have a couple minutes for an art project? And this is a project I started shooting. Now, initially I had people tell me, the reaction overall was pretty positive, but in any time of a project on the street like this, especially in New York, you're going to get, get the fuck out of here or go back to your own neighborhood or whatever. Even though I was shooting literally like half a block from where I was living at the time, but you just can't let that bother you. And what really kind of got me sold on this project and got me sold on photography and kind of changed the trajectory of my life was actually this person right here. And so he walked up looking like this, and he was a giant of a man. I mean, he was 6'4", I don't know, 250. I mean, just a big guy. And he projected that energy. But at this point, I'd been shooting this is on the very first day, and I'd been shooting probably like half hour out there. So I'd asked a number of people. So I saw him walk by and I asked him, and he was like, okay, fine. And, he comes over and he stands there and I shoot him. And after we were done, he said, you should have shot me across the street because I burned that building down when I was a kid. And I was like, wow. And he had some scars on you can kind of see it on the camera right side of his neck and stuff. And I said, is that where you got those scars? And he said, no, that's from when my girlfriend threw acid on me. And I was just kind of amazed by that whole story. But I was like, well, would you mind taking your hat off and letting me see those scars? And he looked at me for a second and said, sure. And this big giant of a man took off his hat and do-rag and looked at me with this look with half his face melted away. And it was a really moving moment that somebody who I didn't know at all, had been talking to for 3 minutes, was willing to open themselves up and make themselves this vulnerable to me. And then literally like a half hour later, this man walked up to me and he had these wraparound glasses, and I'm a portrait guy, so I want to have eyes. So I asked him if he would take the glasses off, and he says, no, I just lost an eye to cancer and people don't react well to how I look. And I said, fine. And I took a couple shots like this, and then I showed it to him and I said, I would be honored to shoot you the way you are, and I promise I won't react poorly if you're okay with that. And he looked at me, thought for a second, and he said, fine. And he took off the glasses. And like I said, this project and this day in particular kind of changed the trajectory of my photography career, because once again, I was just blown away by this person who didn't know me from Adam, who had something that, people did not react well to, was once again willing to open up and share and allow me to, have a part of that. And, you're going to see as we go through these personal projects, as and how I've used them to kind of build my career. A lot of projects like Fulton Street, where I'm doing kind of almost sociological, where I'm in one location, shooting things in one way, and the only thing that changes is the person. And a lot of that comes back to this, because this really kind of made me love the exchange that a photographer and his subject can have in making a portrait. And then you can kind of see here a little bit, I just taped the seamless to the building. You can really see here that it's just seamless taped to a metal door on a business. So that's Fulton Street. And at this point, it was 2011. I was still like a headshot and, a part-time headshot and lifestyle photographer. But I had these two portrait projects now. I had the Editorial project and I had Fulton Street. But what do you do with them? And this goes not just for me in that moment, but what can you do with a personal project? One of the first things is you can pitch it. You can contact editors and publications to see that it might be right for and see if they're interested in running it. You can use it as an email update. Now, for me, email updates are a big part of my marketing plan. I try to send them out quarterly, and you can do it either yourself or use a provider. And some of the ones I've used in the past are MailChimp and Sendinblue. And with those email updates, you may ask, where do we get the emails? So for me, you can get them at portfolio reviews. You can buy them from Agency Access or Yodelist. You can get them from LinkedIn. You can get them from Twitter and Instagram. A lot of times photo editors will say in their bio or profile on Twitter and Instagram that you can, they have their email saying you can pitch them. And then also you can just do it the old fashioned way, look at the masthead or go to the website. And another thing you can, personal projects allow you to do is, have something to show at portfolio reviews. And I've used portfolio reviews in building my careers a lot. And the ones I've used in the past are NYC Photo Works, both in New York and LA, the Palm Springs Photo Festival here in New York. They also do in Palm Springs, SPD, APA, obviously, as we're doing an APA event here. And then a lot of them have online options now as well. The other thing you can do is promos. And I've used, with these personal projects, I've made promos from personal projects a lot. So I am going to actually stop share. And then, so I've done everything from here's the promo I did for Fulton Street. And it's like a full-on mini magazine, 20 pages. Where it's a combination of images and text. And I've done, similar, we're going to talk later about Wife During Quarantine. I've done a promo of Wife During Quarantine, once again, like a full-on mini magazine. So this was done with MagCloud. This was done with Mixam. They're both good. I do prefer Mixam these days. And then I've done everything, just little flyers or little mini books, There's a lot of different options out there. But the one thing for me,
sorry to interrupt you, but you've gotten a few questions about
Sure.
your lighting, about whether the Fulton Street project was all natural light, or did you use any lighting? And also for the Friends project, which I think you actually already answered that, because you said you traveled with your lighting and set everything up. So,
well, yeah, okay. So Fulton Street was 100% natural light. And I shot it, if you go and look at the behind the scenes pics for Abaddon's in the American West, it's very similar. I mean, I've just basically found a northern exposure where the building is behind, and above or in front of me is just plain, or in front of the subject, I should say, is just open sky. So it's just the equivalent, there's no direct sun on them, and just the sky is basically just a huge softbox in front of them. So that is all natural light. On the Friends project, it was a mix of lit and non, I think I can go back. I'll start sharing the screen again here. And so if I zip back to here, yeah, this is all natural light. Natural light, lit. And this lit is just a small 24-inch softbox with a Nikon SB80 flash in it. I'm like I mentioned, I got into photography late, and I'm self-taught. So strobist was a big influence of me in learning lighting. And so I started as a strobist photographer with just little Nikon flashes. And so that was that. This is obviously natural light. This is lit, and it's just an umbrella in a Nikon speed light in an umbrella. Natural light. This is lit by the two TVs. He's a mixed media artist. So I use those to light him. And that I think answers that question. Anything else?
that's it for now.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. So yeah, so basically, and so for promos, like I said, I try to do the emails to editors, et cetera, on a quarterly basis. I try to do a actual physical print once a year. And I don't necessarily mail it out to a mass mailing. I'll mail it out to the people I've met and or have had interactions with. or who have hired me. I'm not, printing 1,000 of them and just mass mailing them to everybody. And then another thing to do with the personal projects is photography contests. And I think photography contests are great for a couple different reasons. The people who are judging them are people who can hire you. If you win an award, it's something to send in your quarterly updates or talk to people about in portfolio reviews. It gives you a little bit of credibility. And for me, winning these types of awards, not having come from a photography school or assisted for anybody famous or anything like this, I was coming into this, as a headshot photographer, part-time headshot photographer who nobody knew. So for me, getting these little bits of recognition and excuses to email editors and say, hey, this image of mine was selected for American Photography or for the Communication Arts Photo Annual, was a way for me to build credibility and get recognition. And, there's a lot of photography contests out there. And I always say that a lot of them, aren't necessarily worth it because you've paid a lot of money and they're not really, giving much in return. Maybe the people judging it aren't people who are that big in the industry who can hire you or have an impact on your career. So the ones I normally work with are American Photography, Communication Arts Photo Annual, the APA contests, and IPA. A couple that I haven't really done but are well respected are World Press, Sony, and P3 in Paris. And then a couple now that I have the Wife During Quarantine book, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, Critical Mass and Photo Lucida are more competitions for books. So those are a variety of the things you can do with personal projects. And just to kind of reiterate, create the work you want to be getting as paid work, and then get that in front of as many people who can hire you as possible. And that's kind of been my mantra on personal works and building my career. So with that mantra in mind, Westminster Dog Show. I wanted to shoot Westminster Dog Show. I love dogs, and I always just thought it was a great event that it would be fun to shoot. And there's obviously a lot of people who shoot, Dina Latofsky and other people who kind of shoot that one-handed flash, handheld flash. And I thought, well, I could do that. Let's go shoot Westminster that way. So I went and shot Westminster, and aided because I wanted to. This is kind of work I wanted to start getting hired for. So I wanted to build the portfolio. And I wanted to have a portfolio on my website, and I wanted to, build the skill set necessary to show people I could do this. So I went there and shot. And once again, this is just handheld flash in my left-hand camera, with a 50 millimeter or 40 millimeter. I'm not sure. I think it was actually a 40 on all these lens. Now, and then going back to what do you do when you have this work? Well, I pitched it to somebody, and one of the people I had met was a photo editor at New York Magazine's The Cut. So after the first day with Westminster's multiple days, I emailed her saying, hey, I've been shooting the Westminster. I think that, there's something you might be interested in. I'm going to be back there tomorrow. And New York Magazine wrote back and said, yes, we'd love to buy these images from you. And so when you're done with the second day, send them to us. And, so suddenly, this personal project went from just developing, a portfolio and building skill set to actually paid work. And then once again, I always say, going back to what you can do with it, submit them in photography contests. This image I submitted it to American Photography, and it was chosen for American Photography, as was this one. And going back to what else you can do with personal projects, I made a brochure out of it to hand, when I'm at portfolio reviews or meeting people, to be able to have as a leave behind. So, I did a rest and show, there's kind of the behind the scenes, the people who didn't win was basically kind of the theme of this project. So that was Westminster. And then, I'd done that once, and then I had some friends that wanted to go to Bushwig, which is a drag festival here in town. So I thought, well, I'll take my camera. So I, once again, doing the exact same thing, handheld, flash. I shot these, and I did the exact same thing. I pitched my New York Magazine, The Cut editor, saying, hey, I've shot these. Is this something you're interested in? Here's some images from today. I'm going back tomorrow. And she said, yes, we love them. And she bought this project. So when I do these things, like I wanted to build the skill set of shooting, the one-hand flash, the handheld flash. And so I did it at Bushwick, I did it at Westminster, and then, once again, practice. I did it at the Mermaid Parade, the same type of shoot. Because I just want to get so good at it that it's become second nature. So if I do get hired to do it, that, I'm sure I can deliver. And thanks to developing the skill, showing this work, pitching the client, New York Magazine actually reached out to me and asked me to shoot Pride for them. Once again, just kind of doing the handheld strobe or handheld flash. So that was that. Now, one of the things I like to do is go back and shoot things more than one time. But for me, I've kind of already done that handheld flash kind of thing. I didn't want to shoot it the same way. So I went back and shot Bushwick a second time. And I did it basically, instead of a handheld flash, I have a softbox in my hand up against a backdrop. And you can see my setup here. Because I wanted to shoot it different. I wanted to have a different look. I wanted to develop a different skill set. And basically what I decided, this was kind of the first project where I decided I want to know how fancy I can get just by myself with no assistant and still make professional studio-ish portraits. And so that's what my driving purpose was on this. But once again, when I was done with it, I pitched my editor, and my editor at this point had moved on from New York Magazine to InStyle. So I reached out to InStyle saying, hey, I've shot these images. Are you interested in? And they were interested. And so they purchased the images and ran them. And so, and once again, if you have good images that you're proud of, get them out there where people can see them and recognize them. So I submitted this image to American Photography, and it was selected for American Photography.
Chris, we're getting a bunch of questions about releases. When you do these projects, do you get releases?
I do not, and it's for a couple different reasons. First of all, for editorial and or fine art or documentary use, you don't need releases. And second of all, in these types of fast-moving street photography kind of shoots, it would be very difficult, and it would be an unproductive use of my time, since I don't need a release for the type of use that I'm going to end up using it for, to spend my time trying to do it. And also, a lot of people would probably turn me down. Like Fulton Street, if I had, I'm already at the point of being, a white guy in a black neighborhood asking these people to take their picture. If I was also asking them to sign something, it never would have happened.
Yeah.
So, and same with these events. Not that I might get a better ratio of sign, but a lot of people just say it's not worth it, and it's too fast moving in these type of situations where it's like each of these is like 2 to 5, maybe 10 shots over like 30 seconds to 2 minutes. And then there's people waiting, or I'm running to ask people. So it's just all is too fast moving and too hectic to be doing releases. And like I said, for me, my planned uses, are documentary, editorial, and fine art, which I wouldn't need because I'm not planning a commercial use for these.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So once again, I did this Bushwick with a handheld softbox, but, I don't want to do it just once. I want to get so good at it. So when I go and hopefully get assignments doing it, that I know I can do it well. So I went to Comic-Con and did the exact same thing, but different backdrop, but the same thing, a 24-inch octagon or octabox handheld. And this is just set up in the alley. If you've been to the convention center here in New York, this is just that center alleyway, just a backdrop up against a wall, and it's like a 4x5 backdrop that barely, you can barely get a 3/4 from. Just, asking people as they walk by, hey, you want to get your picture taken? And then I went back to the Mermaid Parade. I had just like with Bushwick, I had previously shot it handheld flash. I went back and, did it on a backdrop. And you can see here, the setup. Once again, just a small little backdrop, just asking people do they have time for a shoot? So once again, going back to shooting things multiple times with Bushwig, I wanted to go back for a third year, but once again, I didn't want to shoot it the same way. And once again, I'm trying to build my skill set. I'm trying to get the work I want to be doing. And one of the things I would love to be doing is, you know, the work where you get sent to a film festival and you're shooting these celebrity portraits and stuff. So I'm always trying to see in this kind of assembly line work, how complicated of lighting can I get just by myself? And so I had this idea to shoot with gels because I wanted to be able to not just have one backdrop. I wanted to be able to change a lot of different things about the image, but still be able to do it myself. So I'm going to go through some of these and I'll show you and tell you what the lighting is. So you see this, and then, so this is the lighting. The main light is this snooted strobe that lights their face with white light or plain light. There's a small umbrella that is gelled to the color I want the backdrop and fill light to be. And then there's an on-camera flash that's gelled a different color that fills in the light that neither of those two hit. So you can see this is actually that exact image. So you see white light on the face, you see yellow light that colors the backdrop, and you can see that the shadow has a little bit of a blue tint. And that comes from a CTB filter or a gel on my on-camera flash. And so for this one, it was, you know, a cyan or a pink gel, a blue gel on my on-camera flash to fill in that secondary shadow, and then the snooted light on the face. So once again, I did the exact same thing I did on the other things. I didn't, so you may ask, why don't I pitch these things before I go shoot? And I guess it's kind of imposter syndrome. I'm always worried I'm going to fail. So I always go to these things, and this was a light I tried and practiced with my wife and stuff, but I hadn't done live, you know, in a, you know, hectic environment, in an event environment before. So I wasn't sure how it was going to work. But after the first day, I was like, oh, I'm very happy with how these images turned out. So I hadn't pitched it before because I didn't know how they were going to turn out. After the first day, I once again reached out to my editor at InStyle magazine, or it's actually InStyle magazine. It was a different editor than my editor I'd worked with before I'd left, and said, hey, I have these images from Bushwig. I'm going to be back there tomorrow. Are you interested in them? And yes, they were. And so they licensed them and ran them. And once again, I'm always trying to figure out, like, if there's an image I love, get it out there, get it in contest. So I entered this image in American Photography, and it was chosen for American Photography. So, and just like doing that work for New York Magazine had led to them hiring me to shoot the Pride Parade, doing the Bushwig work for InStyle had led them to hire me to shoot the porcelain ball for them in that same style. Once again, just, you know, the gelled main light or gel fill light, snooted main light on the face, and then a secondary gelled light to fill in the shadow on the left. And then the interesting thing about this light is it looks kind of cool even if you don't gel it. So this woman came up, and, you know, she had this white, and, you know, we did shoot her with the red, just kind of accentuate the red in her hat, but then I didn't really love it. And I thought, this is one where let's try it without any gels. And I thought it still worked well. So going back to using personal projects to develop a skill set, to develop or to build a portfolio, and to hopefully get work, me going on my own to Westminster and Bushwig and shooting those and then pitching them had this chain reaction where I had 4 personal shoots picked up by publications. I got 2 additional new assignments. I got 2 new clients, New York Magazine and InStyle, and I got 4 images selected for American Photography. All because I said, you know what, on this Saturday, instead of sitting home watching college football or whatever, I'm going to go to this event. So this is a big reason why I'm a huge fan of personal projects, because things like this is basically how my career progressed. So now I've kind of talked about generally there, building the career and the skill set. Some of the technical details, like how do I get access, to these events? Well, a lot of times I'm just choosing events that are open to the public. Westminster, Bushwick, Pride, Mermaid Parade, Comic-Con, all of those you can go and shoot without a press pass and just as a participant or an attendee. And some of them you don't even have to pay to be an attendee, like Westminster and Mermaid or Westminster, Bushwick, and Comic-Con. You have to pay to be an attendee, but like Pride and Mermaid Parade, you do not. You can also get a press pass. And if you're doing this when you don't have a client in mind, which oftentimes I don't have, like I said, I'm shooting these on my own and then later pitching them. So I don't have a client. I'll just apply for a press pass and list my stock agency as a client because, I'll list them as editorial images or put them up as editorial images, a selection with Redux, which handles editorial work for me. And I'll just list them as my client, and I've gotten press passes that way. And also you can just write to people and just say, hey, I'm doing this project, explain why, your passion for it, whatever. And oftentimes you'll get access that way. So we've talked about how I kind of built my career with personal projects. COVID kind of ended my career. Well, it didn't end my career, but it ended active work. March 13th, everything in New York shut down. And within days, I lost all of my assignments. They were either postponed indefinitely or canceled. And the thing about COVID was not only could I not go on assignments and fulfill assignments, but me, Mr. Personal Project, I couldn't even go and do personal projects because you couldn't interact with other people. A lot of people, were doing like FaceTime portraits and things like that. That never really appealed to me because, a huge part of portraiture to me, going back to Fulton Street and those couple images I showed you is the interaction with the person I'm shooting. So I love being in person with the project. So that didn't work for me. What ended up happening is a project that became Wife During Quarantine, but initially it wasn't that. I spent the first 6 weeks of the pandemic sitting on the couch, doom scrolling and not shooting at all, probably like a lot of you guys. But it was very frustrating to me. And because, when I'm not shooting, I get irritable because it's a huge part of how I just vent my creativity and energy. And then one day I saw my wife wearing a shirt, a green silk shirt, and I realized, I have a green backdrop. And those peacock feathers my wife has as a decoration over here matched that. And suddenly an image came to mind, and I asked her if she had time to shoot between her Zoom calls, and she did. And this is that image. And I'm just going to very quickly here. This is all of Wife During Quarantine, all 67 images in 1 minute. And so it started as just, shooting my wife here, a few days later shooting her. But I thought, this is a project that could really kind of check a lot of the boxes on my personal projects checklist. It fills my time, it fulfills my creativity. It allows me to develop a skill set and practice things I wouldn't probably get to do in the constraints of an editorial shoot. It's sometimes very hard to get super creative when you have 10 minutes with somebody, because you can't take the risk and the time that, something doesn't work. If I'm there for 10 minutes with somebody and I have to get 2 different looks or 3 different looks, trying some weird gel thing or, often it's just like, you just can't risk it. So this was a chance for me to basically develop work in a skill set that I wouldn't be able to otherwise, and also allow me afterwards to be able to show other people and say, hey, I can do this type of work. So once again, going back to why personal projects, Wife During Quarantine basically hit them all. Allowed me to build a portfolio, fulfill my creativity, fill the time, because what else was I going to do during the pandemic? Generate new work, develop and practice skills, and it very quickly became a passion project that I loved doing and people responded well to. And then the other thing I discovered during the course of doing this was it not only allowed me to fulfill my creativity, to exercise my creativity, it allowed me to develop and practice my creativity, to become more creative. And so when I started this presentation, I said, we're going to spend about the first however long talking about like the kind of the nuts and bolts of what you can do in personal projects, et cetera. And then the second half talking a lot about more about creativity. And so that's where we're getting to now, because during the course of Wife During Quarantine, I kind of figured out a lot of things that worked for me personally about how to become more creative and become a better photographer. So a lot of times when you hear about creativity, a lot of people have it as, it's a flash of inspiration and a bolt of lightning. And it certainly can be, but it doesn't have to be. And for me, honestly, it most often isn't. Images very rarely come to mind fully formed. I more often have more of a roadmap, and then I have to figure out how to get to where I'm going. And here we have that. And the idea is just a starting point. It's like a roadmap toward a destination that I have to find. And so finding that destination for me is solving a problem. And so you can look at, at least from my perspective, and obviously this is just, my opinion, it's different for everybody, but hopefully this is of use to me, because when I would go listen to people when I was learning photography, so often it was about the how and not the why. And anytime people talked about the why, I found that very interesting because you didn't hear it that often. And I also love hearing people's thought process and how they got from an idea to an image on the page or an image on the screen. And one of the things I kind of started working through the course of Wife During Quarantine is building an image or an idea in layers. And that is a way for me to help translate a very basic idea I may have in my head to the final image. I don't know if you've watched the Get Back documentary of the Beatles, but it's very interesting to me because, they're absolutely creative geniuses, but you see them on, have just a riff, but a riff isn't a song. And so you see them through the course of the hours of the documentary, building that riff into a song, layering different things on top of it. And then finally they have the song at the end. So the spark of creation, the initial riff, yes, you need that, but you also have to have all these other things to get to the song at the end or to get to the image on the page. So yeah, for me, personal projects became not only a way to exercise creativity, but a way to refine and development. So there are image basics that, you just have to have. You have to have a good pose. You have to have a good expression. You have a nice setting, good lighting. If there's props or anything in the image, in the frame, you need to have that all working together. And then just one thing I just want to mention here. One of the things I'm going to try to talk about here, and I kind of talked about the how and the why a little bit ago, but specifically about lighting, a lot of times when you're talking about images, people talk about how they lit it, but not why. And I'm going to try to talk in some of these images why I lit it a certain way, because how you light things can help tell the story or improve the image. So this is an image I made of John C. Reilly not long before the pandemic. And it was, I like this image. He liked it. The client, Wall Street Journal, liked it. It's a good image. But this image, even before COVID and before Wife During Quarantine, I was already like kind of evaluating my work, trying to think, how can I make it to the next level? And this image was kind of the inspiration, because I was like, this is a great image. I love this image, but there is nothing about this image that says Chris Sorensen. There's nothing special necessarily about this image. A lot of different photographers could make this image. So I wanted to start thinking about where I can add things to an image to make it more sophisticated, more, deeper, better. And so, through the course of the pandemic, I came up with this list of things, which I use SCAMPS as an acronym, just, nothing special about it. It just helps me remember it. And these are just things I try to think about when I'm trying to make an image so that I don't get settled into the easy way out. Like, it's not easy to make this, but this is just a big softbox, to the left and, him in a good pose, so, and it's, eye level, and there's not any, it's a, 85 millimeter lens. There's all these things that are typical about this image. So I wanted to start thinking about the things that can differentiate my images. So shapes were things, colors, angles, movement, parts, and shadows. And I'm going to kind of give examples for what I mean by each of these using Wife During Quarantine images. So when I say shapes, I'm talking about basically trying to make things abstract, trying to, deal with, blocks of space and negative space and things that are, abstract, more artish as opposed to just typical photography. So like here, I wanted the chair to I wanted to hide her body using the black on black and have the chair basically function as a de facto skeleton. Here the idea was, a paper dowel look. And so obviously it's all about the shapes, and all made with seamless paper and cardboard. My handmade image, it's just all just, it's trying to, I had this idea, but, once again, do I want to shoot her in a costume? No. So what did I have? I had seamless paper and then start looking about try to abstract that into shapes and colors. And then speaking of colors would be another way. So you can, start thinking you can make colors or images all about the color. So, multiple colors, bright colors, but also when I mention colors, I can mean monochromatic, where it's, it's all about a single color. So here, pretty much everything is orange other than the black and her, the dress and the dark of the tree and her skin. And then another way to look at for colors is almost monochromatic, but almost black and white, where there's very little color in the scene. So for this image, it's basically a black and white image except for her skin and hair. So ways of looking at color: monochromatic, quasi black and white, or all about the color. And then angles. And when I say angles, I'm talking about a couple different things. I'm talking angle of view. So like from here, I'm shooting up at her, because I think a lot of times we fall into the habit of shooting, because we see things at eye levels and we shoot at eye level a lot. So I wanted to force myself to look from other viewpoints. So angles meaning viewpoint, but also angles meaning angle of view. And so for this, I'm shooting this with a 28 millimeter lens. So normally you wouldn't shoot a portrait with a 28 millimeter lens, a foot from her face. But, for this type of image, it kind of worked for the type of feel I was going for. So angles here also meaning angle of view, how wide or telephoto the lens is. And then here, this is actually a combination of both the angle of view and the angle I'm shooting at. I am literally on the floor right in front of her shoes with a 24 millimeter lens shooting up at her, which distorts the lens. Her feet are much bigger than they would be. Her upper body kind of gets smaller, but giving the pose and the movement and the gelling, it helps kind of accentuate the kind of floating away look, only grounded by the shoes. And then movement. And for movement, I mean two things. I mean the movement of the subject. So here it's a flash and then LEDs, continuous lights, and then she spins around. So you get that initial freeze frame of the flash and then her moving. So you get movement of the person, but also, I mean, movement of the camera. So for this image where I wanted a kind of pop arty Warhol-esque thing, I did stroboscopic mode on my flash where it'll fire like, 6 times or, I guess there's 6 things. So it was 3 times a second for 2 seconds. And I just slowly panned and so the frozen part of it is the flash. The colors is because I have 2 LEDs, which gives you the movement and the coloring. But so movement meaning color, movement of person and movement of camera. And then parts. I'm always trying to see how little I need to show to tell the story. I think one of the things, a habit I'd gotten into, like you could see with the John C. Reilly shot, was always kind of shooting like a typical head and shoulders. But, I wanted to start to think about like, how little do I need to show to make a portrait or to tell the story of an image? So there's a couple few examples of that. And then shadows. Obviously, shadows meaning, you can play with shadows on the wall, like what kind of shadows are cast, like that. They can be fun. But I also mean shadows as in what you choose to show and what you don't choose to show. What is in shadow? So for this, she is basically in shadow. I mean, you can barely see her there, but she's basically in silhouette. So I'm always thinking, okay, does throwing a shadow somewhere make an image more interesting, or does leaving something in shadow make it more interesting? So these two images are basically silhouettes, though there is detail and you can kind of see your face, but it's, once again, it's where you put the light and, using shadows to make a more interesting image. So those are the things that I kind of developed through the course of doing Wife During Quarantine. Now I'm just going back to, what were my goals for it? And one of the things, I had never considered what I did art before this project. As a photographer, I think there's a natural progression from taking a picture to making a picture. And I had kind of done that in my career before that, but what I hadn't really done is make art. And that was one of the things I wanted to do with this project, to go from taking a picture to making a picture to making art. And kind of along those same lines, you can create an image, which is fine. You can create a character, which is more interesting, or you can tell a story in a picture, and that's like a higher level. And so that's what I was aiming for in some of these images. And that's, speaking of, so like I said, this is the first time I'd completely been constructing an image, everything in the frame. On editorial assignments, and even, you have limitations on the subject, the location, the requirements of the client, et cetera. So you can't always do exactly what you want. And then a lot of the personal projects, which I've showed you that I'd done before, were not personal projects where you're constructing something. It's more where you're documenting something. So this is where I was constructing something. So it was one of the things I wanted to do was develop and practice that skill. So this is that first image. She was wearing this silk shirt. I knew I had this green background. I knew we had these peacock feathers. And then it was like problem solving. Okay, so I have these three things. What can I do with it? And it's like, well, kind of like a Renaissance kind of milkmaid kind of image, seemed like a logical thing. So that's what we went with. And going back to like my checklist, this kind of fits the color thing. Everything kind of has the green, and then obviously the green goes well with her red hair. And once again, you can see though, this was the first one. It's not that different lighting wise and concept wise than this image. Second image, same thing. It was, I knew I had pink seamless. She was wearing a pink sweater. Let's do it. Let's dress it up. Let's put these glasses on. Let's have the light reflect in the glasses so they blow out. That was that. And so those were the first two shots. But on the third shot, I already started thinking, you know what, let's start to get out of my comfort zone. I've made things that are kind of similar to what I would make. So for this, I wanted almost a painterly look. So I was shooting, natural light, long exposure, trying to get the kind of blur and imperfection. Because one of the things I think is a lot of times photography for me is too clinical. So I was trying to get to a place where the images were not so clinical. Here, this is the only reason I have this one in here, because it tells you just how little you need to come up with an idea for a photo. So this was at the beginning. This was the fourth image in the series, and she got a mask because, this was right when everybody was finally saying you need to buy masks. So she ordered this mask, which was kind of fancy. It hung down. And I'm like, wow, we should shoot that. So then I'm like, okay, all right, so now let's start problem solving. I know I have a mask and I know I want to shoot it. How do we shoot it? So color, I'm like, okay, initially it's a black mask. What do you have? Black and white. And then she had this crazy suit. Okay, we know we have the mask and we have this black and white suit. I'll put it on a white, and to dress it up even more, once again, using my little list of like, how can I make it more interesting? We can play with shadow. So hard light to get to hard shadow. And then what else do we have around the house? Well, she's wearing a mask. So, that's kind of villainous. Because then I started thinking, okay, Bond villain. We had this derby hat that I had used for a Halloween costume. So let's put that on her. It's like a Bond villain look. Let's put these leather gloves on. And suddenly we had from just the initial idea of here's a mask, what are we going to do with it? This image came together. This was the 10th image, and this was the one where I really, for the first time, started building everything in the images. And the inspiration for this was watching a documentary during the pandemic on Pollock. And of course, he was obviously just covered in paint, and his studio was covered in paint. It was just all filthy. And my thought was, oh, it'd be funny if, everything was filthy, but he was clean. And that just one sentence there was the genesis of this image. But then once again, going back to the idea, you have these kind of very general idea in your head, but now you have to translate that from an idea to a actual image. So problem solving, like, what does that look like? Okay, well, once again, I don't want to make a true Pollock, but I want that kind of messy feel, but I want it to be bright and poppy. So, Crayola paints, and then on seamless. And so the night before I just sprinkled, sprayed this on, let it dry. And then it was like, okay, how is she doing? And what is she sitting? And then, she obviously is going to be perfectly clean. And I wanted that to be kind of, prim and proper. So like a dress shirt buttoned all the way up. And then I wanted it to be, once again, a very clean image. So I'm like, okay, I need her hair up. And so if I'm going to have her hair up, if I have her hair up, she often has, those, needles in her hair to hold it. I'm like, I can use paintbrushes as those. That just another little tidbit that you may not notice initially, but on second look, you can say, oh, okay, paintbrushes. And so all these little things start to come together and suddenly, it works out to a full image. This was the same thing. It was like, we're dealing with the pandemic. Oh, I'm going to go back to this for a second, talking about the why of lighting versus the how of lighting. This is just a giant 60-inch soft lighter directly above me. And, with white walls on the side in our apartment for fill. So it's just very super soft and whatever. And basically the reason I lit it like this is there's certain images where it's all about the lighting, and then there's certain images where it's not about the lighting. This is an image where there's so much going on already in the image. I didn't need fancy lighting because the image itself already takes care of the interest. The lighting doesn't have to carry the image. So I just wanted it to accentuate and just kind of be flat and just, basically look like she's in the painting. So this very soft, flat lighting was why and how I lit this. So this image, basically kind of the same thing. I had this idea, once again, it's during the pandemic. What are we doing? We're sitting around watching movies. So I thought, okay, if she's, I should shoot her in the living room watching a movie. And then it's like, okay, how do we build an image from there? Okay, so I knew it was going to be environmental. And then it's like, okay, let's do all the stereotypical things, but just really amp them up. Because the more you amp them up, the more things you add, the funnier or more interesting it gets. So, okay, let's have curlers in her hair. And let's not only just have curlers in her hair, let's have the biggest curlers we can get. Let's have her, have a mask on her face. Let's have her in the fuzzy robe. Let's have her in the fuzzy slippers, the giant bowl of popcorn, a giant, super full glass of wine. All those various things, suddenly you start to build this, image that becomes more interesting. Now, as far as lighting, you can see it here. It is to the far right. It's just a strobe in a small umbrella bouncing off the wall with a bunch of blue gels, which gives the overall kind of nighttime feel. And also it kind of gives you the reflection in that third window over, that kind of gives you a little bit more depth. So it's not all black windows. Then I had a gridded softbox gelled green that kind of, gives a different color and kind of, mixes color tones and everything to kind of mimic, that this is all being lit by the TV. And then because I wanted her to actually look normal, there's a snooted strobe right next to the softbox that is shooting across the image and hitting the wine bottle, hitting her fuzzy slippers, hitting the popcorn box, and then hitting her face. So those three light sources all kind of combine to give good light on her, but then the kind of mixed blue and green light that reads nighttime and TV. And then obviously I wanted a practical light to kind of sell it as, and that's the incandescent light there. And obviously everything had to be balanced to that. That was the kind of base level there for that. This is another image I had a long time ago where once again, it becomes, you have this general idea And then how do you translate that to an actual image? And so the idea here was, and I actually had this before COVID and actually before Trump and fake news and everything. It was the idea of a blindfolded person reading a censored newspaper. And at the time I had the idea, I thought I was going to shoot it environmentally. So I was going to shoot it like in a kitchen. But we had already shot this image for Wife During Quarantine in the kitchen. And I didn't want to, one of the goals of Wife During Quarantine, in addition to trying to develop all these skills, was to try to do unique images, both in subject matter and lighting and everything. So I didn't want to repeat. So I'm like, okay, if we're going to shoot it, it has to be environmental. So I thought about shooting it on seamless, white or black seamless. And eventually I decided I didn't want to do that. Because, you know, through the course of this project, we shot a fair amount on white and black seamless, just given the nature of shooting in our apartment. And then also I thought, by putting the newspaper on it, it actually makes it a stronger image thematically. Because if it was just on black and white, it's an interesting image. It's a person, you know, reading, a blindfolded person reading a censored newspaper. By surrounding her in newspaper, it supports the theme. Here's this woman absolutely surrounded by the news, but unwilling and unable to read it. So I think it strengthens the image that way as well. And we talked about this or showed this a little earlier, this dealing with shapes. The idea here was just, you know, to create a paper doll look. And so we just made it using seamless and a piece of red cardboard that then we put white paper across to make the belt and the little lace neck thing. And once again, going back to this and lighting, once again, this has enough information and stuff going on with it. I didn't need complicated lighting. So this is, once again, just a big soft box or a big soft lighter and then a smaller one for fill next to it. And same with this one. Once again, I wanted it to be a paper doll look where there's, you know, basically no shadow because it's supposed to be flat. So I have a strobe right next to the camera to make as little shadow as possible. Then a big soft lighter behind to fill in to make everything even. Let's see, we are at a long time here. I talked a little about this and the genesis of this and not wanting to shoot it in a costume. And we had already used for our Christmas image, wrapping paper as clothes. So using seamless as, you know, the attire made sense. You can see us here trying it out right before we shot it.
Chris, you can use however much time you need.
Okay, all right, good. And so once again, the question here is, I want to, you know, we had the genesis of this idea was a January 6th insurrection, which the attempted coup got me thinking about fictional coups, which got me thinking about The Handmaid's Tale, but I didn't want to shoot it as a, buy a costume online and shoot it. So I'm like, once again, how can we abstract it and make it more graphic, you know, and, you know, so I thought, you know, wrapping her in seamless and using the white in the natural curve of, you know, that natural curve seamless has, you know, when you take it off the roll and cut it in a way, as you can see here, we were testing like to see if it would fall right to create it. And then once again here now, so talking about the how and why of lighting, this is lit very simply with just a big soft lighter to my right. But there's basically three ways, even with that simple lighting, because once again, I think the image itself is sane enough. I don't need to get super fancy with the lighting. I just need to light it. But even within just simple lighting, I had a few different choices. I could light it from the right, I could light it for the left, or I could light it from kind of above and behind me. And I chose to light it from the right for two different reasons. First off, I get this nice little highlight on the red, that subtle little highlight there, which just tells you there's that curve there and just, you know, it sells that as, you know, more of a shaped thing than just a flat thing. And the other reason I shot it from lit it from the right is so that the face is lit, but it's not lit directly. there's a white wall on the left that is providing some bounce, but I wanted the face to kind of, and especially her eyes, to kind of go into shadow. If I had lit it from the left, it would not be nearly as strong of image, because it would be more about her face, because that would be more lit. You wouldn't have the shadow. It would just, your attention would be drawn there. Lighting it from the right, the attention in your eye is drawn to the shape of the image. You know, it becomes more of a Dutch painting kind of feel, which was what I was going for. This image, once again, like how little things can, you know, lead to ideas. My wife got me a birthday card that had these 3D glasses in it to read it. So, you know, I'm sitting at home, we're in the middle of the pandemic, and I have this project I'm working on. So literally I'm always looking for ideas. So, you know, I got these 3D glasses. I'm like, okay, I have 3D glasses. What can we make with 3D glasses? And then, so I had, okay, 3D glasses, where are you watching it? You're watching it in a movie theater. Okay, so popcorn. Okay, so and then popcorn is, you know, the red and white box to go with the red, white, and blue glasses. So then all of a sudden I'm like thinking, once again, going back to colors as a kind of defining feature of how you kind of create an image. I'm like, okay, this is going to be all about colors. And the easiest thing to do, the most interesting thing for me, was to kind of, we've all seen those 3D images, you know, where you're not wearing the glasses and you see the red and the blue, or the, you know, turquoise on either side. I'm like, I'm going to create a faux 3D look to go with these 3D glasses and the popcorn. So that was what this was. And it's basically just two lights on either side of the camera, just super close, just so you get that symmetrical and super close shadow. One gelled red, one gelled the turquoise, and then opposite of the way they are on her glasses, so that it makes it, you know, the way the color bounces back and forth with the glasses to the shadow. For me, it makes it a little more interesting. This one I talked about a little bit, which was basically the genesis of this idea was I wanted to take something tangible and make something abstract. And so we had several objects in the apartment that I thought would work. We had this chair, and I thought, okay, I could put her in this chair. And she, you know, she had this kind of velvety outfit, which didn't reflect a lot of light. So I knew that if I put that on a black seamless, I could get it close enough, but still have the differentiation between the blacks, that she was there, but that in certain views, on a quick view, you wouldn't really see her. And all you would see was this chair as the body. But, you know, things were not always, you know, just cut and dried. So I knew this, and like I said, I had like an additional idea, but I wasn't sure it was going to work. So we actually tried different things. We also had this like piece of art of, you know, acrylic antlers. So we kind of did the same thing, where she's basically like a floating head in the middle of this. Like, this is like a frame, you know, around this picture of her head in this. But I thought this was a stronger image, so that this was the image that I used in the project and in the book. And this is just an outtake. But you can see, you know, where I was kind of working and kind of trying to figure out the concept. And once again, this goes back not only to, you know, shapes and abstraction, but also in colors, because once again, there's not, you know, these are black and white images other than her hair, basically, which was intentional. And this is just a, you know, it's things as easy as New Year's Eve we would use, but mainly the reason I have this in here just to show how not glamorous this work is. Here's the behind the scenes of that. It's just a single stroke because I wanted that bright flash party pick kind of look. But we had just bought a ton of balloons at Dollar General and a little bit of and a little air pump, and used literally suitcases and apple boxes to hold the umbrellas in, and then taped some umbrellas to the seamless to get it behind her. This is an image, you know, going back to using colors, where it's obviously all about the color. So this is 8 different lights, or 7 different lights, excuse me, all gelled different colors, one behind her illuminating the backdrop, 2 small umbrellas on either side, illuminated the backdrop and the side of her face, and then 4 in a quadrant of each quarter of her face. And then once again, I'm always, thinking of angles and trying to make things interesting. This would be a fine image if it was just a regular portrait without the super short depth of focus. But I bought a lens baby lens so that I could basically do almost a tilt shift on this and only have her eyes in focus, so that it would just kind of abstract the image a little bit. So, we've had images where it's, not about the lighting, and then like an image like this where it is about the lighting. This is one of the images where it is about the lighting. And you can see even with this one, we played around trying different things because once again, I had a general idea in my head, but most of the times the ideas in my head are verbal, if that makes sense. They're words, they're not necessarily images. And then because that's just the way my brain works. And then I have to translate that to visual. And like I said, that checklist helps me do that. So I knew I wanted to kind of shoot, her covered in a bunch of different gel, lights, but I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted that to look like. So we tried different things. And this is one of the outtakes. And this is an example of that earlier. I talked about wanting to create an Andy Warhol pop arty thing. And so I used stroboscopic mode here where the flash fires 6 times over 2 seconds. I'm doing a slow pan and 2 colored LEDs fill in the color and everything. But again, I knew I wanted to do something pop arty and use the stroboscopic, but I wasn't exactly sure how I wanted that to look. So we did this, but we actually started with this, where I was shooting in a circle with different colored gels, which I liked, but I thought this was the stronger. So this is what we went with. But once again, exploring different things, trying to figure out what I wanted. And this is one of the very last images. This was, I had this idea to like, okay, we did 67 images and I was in none of them. And I wanted to come up with a way to have me in one of the images. So I thought, well, I could do it as a paparazzi. And then, but then I'm like, okay, what does that look like? What do we have? Well, we have a car. I couldn't do like on the street because I can't have other photographers. I have to fake other photographers. We didn't, couldn't be out in like where a lot of other people. I just need to be kind of a confined. And so I'm like, okay, if I have her in a car, and then I'm like, okay, so then what is she wearing? And it's like, okay, thinking of paparazzi, thinking of like Jackie O. And so, I tell, Maggie, my wife, the look is Jackie O. And so she kind of comes up, because one of the things that was so useful and critical to this whole project was her ability with hair and makeup and wardrobe, where if I had an idea, she would be able to realize it. So I was very lucky in that regard. And she was, very integral part of the whole project. But this is an example of that, her coming up with this look. And then, so this is just the camera that is firing is, obviously, looking at her on a tripod. I'm with my backup camera in the frame with a flash. And then I have all of the flashes that are lighting her. There's all of it's on camera flash. There's on camera flash on me. There's an on camera flash of the camera taking the picture on the tripod. And then those 3 lights that are supposed to be other photographers are lights on stands, but once again, all speed lights. So that we get this feel of all of these flashes going off at once. So anyway, so that I guess is about it there. So for me, Wife During Quarantine, going back to what personal projects can do for you. For me, it was a sanity saver and creative outlet. I developed a lot and perfected a lot of new techniques and got a lot of new ways of thinking about images, deeper ways, more creative ways, thinking about things as art as opposed to, just photography. I got a promo out of it. I got a feature in Medium Format Magazine. It's something I've used in email updates. I've used it in portfolio reviews. For me, I mostly do editorial work, and that's great. I love editorial work because of the creativity and the independence of it. But I certainly wouldn't mind shooting more commercial work. And I think a lot of the images from Wife During Quarantine are things that would appeal more to agencies and commercial work than stuff I had shot before as editorial work. So it gives me, once again, a portfolio to show for a new kind of work, which I haven't been getting. We ended up putting a book together of it, and I was lucky. Like I said, I always enter in contests to win a number of awards and recognition with it. So going back to what to do with project, one of the things which I didn't mention before was one of the things you can do with your projects is do a book. I had never done that before. Like I said, I'd done promos, I've done email blasts, I've done that. I had not done a book before. This time we did a book. And there are basically 3 different ways that you can get your book published. The major publishers, Steedle and, all of those, there's a number of independent brands and then self-publishing. The major brands, unless you're very famous or have a very, very successful known project, it's almost impossible. For the independent publishers, that's much more possible. The problem is with them is that most of the time you have to pay for it yourself effectively. That's why you see a lot of people who are publishing, books with independent publishers running. Oh my gosh, I'm spacing the website that does all the fundraising. I'm sorry. Kickstarter, yes. You see all the Kickstarter projects for people that are getting books published, not only self-published, but with publishers, because these independent publishers will require you to, a lot of times, pay for it yourself. And then there's self-publishing. And we self-published our book. And there's a couple different ways to do self-publishing. There's small run with offset printing and digital printing, and then there's print on demand. So we did a bunch of comparisons. So I had Bookmobile, which is a small run place that does a lot of books, do a bunch of samples of Wife During Quarantine. I had print on demand. I did blurb. I did a couple different blurb on the best paper and on like the, and then like the very nice but not best paper. And then I did a company called Mix'em. And basically, oh, here we go, self-financed and Kickstarter. Yeah, there's a couple different ways for self-published to do it. So for self-publishing, blurb, I know a lot of people use them, but we did not choose them for 3 different reasons. First of all, size limitations. The biggest I could get in a portrait orientation was 8x10. Wasn't big enough. Secondly, I didn't like the quality, even on their best paper. I thought Bookmobile and Mix'em were better. And the third thing is, this ended up being a 100-page book, and a 100-page book on blurb with their best paper was going to cost over $100. It's just, I mean, sure, you don't have to pay up front, but I didn't want to have the people I wanted to own my book to have to be paying that much, because I knew it would limit sales, and I wanted a lot of people to have the book. So that eliminated blurb. Bookmobile is a small run publisher. Once again, they did a 9x12. I didn't like the quality. So we ended up going with Mix'em, and it was fantastic for a lot of different reasons. A, the quality, and I'm actually going to take off screen sharing here for a second. Here's a copy of the book, and it's really thick paper, 100 pages, hardcover book, glossy cover, and then nice on the inside. I mean, it's super high quality. And whereas at Blurb, if somebody wanted to buy this book, it was going to be $100, and that's before even taking any profit from me. Just the Blurb cost was going to be $100, and it was only going to be 8x10. This is 8.5x11, and I got this for $18 a copy. So I bought 300 in my initial run. And so for $5,000, I had 300 copies of these, and everybody I showed it to, the quality, the paper, it's not photo paper at all. It's just their glossy, heavy duty paper. It was amazing quality. Everybody who I showed the various options to chose this. And so I love it, because now on a go forward basis, knowing that if I have a project I love, I can, instead of doing it on Blurb and having it be expensive, or having to go to an independent publisher and having to pay so much, for $5,000, you can have a book, or if you only wanted to order 100 for like $1,500 or $2,000, you could have a book. And that was great because, I had heard and I'd watched and read, presentations on, doing your own book, and everything was like, oh, it's like $25,000, $40,000 to do a book. And I'm like, it doesn't have to be. If you find the right publisher and you do it some things yourself, like I designed and laid out the book myself, just because, part of the intent of this whole project was doing everything just her and I, including the design and everything. But, the ability to not have to pay thousands and tens of thousands of dollars to get a book, and have a book that, I've now sold a few hundred copies of, for $5,000 was an amazing revelation to me. And hopefully it's, of value to somebody out there as well. And I'm just going to go quickly back to sharing the screen here quickly, because I would be negligent as a promoter of my own work and trying to follow my own guidelines, to not mention that Wife During Quarantine is for sale at my website, chrissorensen.com/store. But anyway, that is growing your career and creativity with personal projects.
Excellent.
I am open for any questions, and hopefully I didn't lose anybody everybody along the way.
I think just a few people, that's it, but not because you weren't terrific, just I'm sure some people just have other things to go.
No, it was a long presentation. I readily admit that.
But
I thought it was gonna be an hour and a half with questions. We're at an hour 38 and we haven't done questions yet.
Yeah, but there was no lull in there. It was all excellent information. But one person actually asked if you could go back to the image basics slide. If you can, that would be great. But if not, don't worry about it.
Not a problem.
Okay.
And like I was saying when I talked about this, I mean, these are kind of the things you have to deliver as a working photographer. This is the baseline. You need to have, good pose, good expression, a nice setting, good lighting, appropriate props and or extras in the scene. But that's what everybody should be able to deliver. And so to differentiate yourself, you need to start looking at things to add layers.
Yeah. One person had asked, do you ever follow, when you're doing your personal projects with people, do you ever follow up afterwards and give your subjects, copies of the pictures? Or?
Oh, absolutely. That is when I'm doing these kind of what I'll call, street portrait or documentary style, sociological kind of style, like Fulton Street and Comic-Con. And I always tell people, I have cards with me and I'm giving out cards, and I'll say, if you, email me or call me, I will get you a copy of this image. And I think that's part of the exchange of being in that type of situation. They're giving a little bit of themselves. It's incumbent on me to return that favor. And I got to say, for Fulton Street, like I said, initially in the neighborhood, like I went out every day, or not every day. I went out once a week for 6 months during for Fulton Street, and shot hundreds upon hundreds of people. And when I first went out, like I said, there was a little reluctance and or hesitation with people. But the thing that I would always say is, I will get you a copy. I'll email, I'll bring you a print. And, as the project went on, I kind of became the neighborhood photographer. People would see me setting up and would be like, oh, and they would run in, get their family. And, I would take a family picture of, this guy and his wife and kids. And, I think that's part of, what makes photography great is, that, interchange between subject and photographer. And part of that is, that they get something out of it as well.
Someone wrote a comment here, I just bought the book. So someone went to your website and just...
All right. Thank you.
And he also said, thank you, APA and Chris Sorensen. This was a captivating and informative presentation.
Well, I appreciate that.
And let me see, another question. as the person saying that it was motivational. And I guess it helps that that your wife is such a great model.
Well, that's the thing is she would not say that because she absolutely hates having her picture taken. And like before this, it was like pulling teeth to get her to take pictures. She was amazingly receptive and in this. And I think once it kind of got going, she became, and like I said, also she was very involved. I would have these ideas and she would help realize it, with hair and makeup. I'd be like, I need an updo, and she would come up with a beehive out of nowhere, and she would be able to do these amazing makeup. And, I would have, I kind of want a 60s vibe. And she was like, well, how about this for clothes? And so, I was very lucky, that she was willing, but she wasn't necessarily, she had never been a professional model or anything, but yes, I was extremely lucky to have my lovely wife who was willing and also I knew she was good with hair and makeup, but I didn't know she was so good with hair and makeup because we pulled off some things that I don't know if many professional hair and makeup artists could do.
Well, there are quite a few well-known photographers who are known for bodies of work that are of, if not their whole families, certain members of their families. So, whether the husband or wife, so it's not, you're not alone in this. There are some other people who tap the same well. So yeah. What are you working on anything now you'd like to projects you'd like to say, or do you keep your projects quiet until you're done?
No, one of the things I discovered through the course of doing this is I like making what I would call politically or socially conscious fine art images, like The Handmaid, which is probably my most liked image and probably most popular and most awarded image. The morning news with a blindfolded person reading a censored, those kind of images that are fine art but have a political and or social component. I want to do more than those, and so I've been working on doing more of those. I recently finished a image on abortion rights, which is on my Instagram, on the Dobbs decision. In fact, I guess I can. Let's see if I have it here. I guess I got to share screen first, but yeah. So my goal is to continue to make socially conscious fine art images, and so this image I just recently made, and and now I have one that I'm working on cancer. That's going to be next. And so I'm going to keep kind of doing these kind of themed fine art images. And this image here is kind of going back to the ideas, after the Dobbs decision came through, I was obviously, like many people, very irritated and upset and angry. So I wanted, for me, one of the things I discovered through this project is art allows me to exercise my frustrations and or feelings. So I wanted to make an image. And so, I just thought that basically evangelical Christians in the United States were basically punishing, women in America. And the most, famous Christian punishment in history is the crucifixion of Christ. So once I had that kind of correlation in my head, it was then just, how do I problem solve to adjust the image to make it tie to what I did? And so, we have the crown made of hangers, the loincloth made of the American flag. Instead of the cut in the side bleeding, it's, from the crotch, instead of the INRI sign, it's Dobbs. There was ways for me to, translate it to make a political statement with the fine art image, and things along this line is what I want to continue making besides my assigned work.
Do you share all of your projects on social media as you're going along?
Yeah, I'm, with wife during quarantine, I shared them as I shot them. And with the Dobbs image, I shared it once I was done with it. I think social media is kind of the way it is right now. I mean, people may be frustrated with Instagram and the algorithm, and gosh, if I'm not doing reels, I'm not getting the engagement. But I mean, that's where people are, even as, not as great as it used to be as it is now. So yeah, I think social media and, Twitter too, but though Twitter is not as important because it's not as visual for me personally, but I do share images on there. But I do think Instagram is important. And when I do portfolio reviews and meet with editors and stuff like that, they all say that they're, looking on Instagram and finding photographers on Instagram. So having a active Instagram account, I think, is important to being a working photographer.
You mentioned a viewer named Yulia said, you mentioned about a stock agency. Could you share about your experience working with stock agencies?
Right. So I have two different stock agencies. I'm with Gallery Stock for like my travel and kind of all that kind of other stuff. And then for my celebrity and editorial work, I'm with Redux. And I've been very happy with both of them. I don't shoot specifically for stock a lot. If I'm shooting like a travel assignment or we go on a trip, I shoot a bunch of images and then I'll put them up on Gallery Stock. If I shoot an editorial assignment, I'll put it with Redux. I'm not shooting like a lot of generic lifestyle images or stuff like that, but I do put, work with those two agencies, and it has led to, sales big and small. So, I mean, I don't think it's as good as it, like I said, I got my first camera in 2008 and I didn't become a full-time pro until 2012. So I haven't been a photographer that long, despite being old, but so I was never, I guess, part of the time when stock was huge and you could make a living on stock. I've always been a photographer when there was, dollar stock, you know what I mean? Where it had already kind of been devalued. But I do put work with them, and I think it is important to do, because what else am I going to do with it? Yeah. I put it with them, and hopefully it has a secondary life, and hopefully it makes me a little money. The one thing I would say on stock is don't devalue your work. Yeah. There's a lot of agencies where they are like dollar and images. My agencies are not that. My images are not royalty free. They are, licensed, and more typical, the traditional licensing, as opposed to the royalty free for nothing. I've made a choice to be with those types of agencies, just because I think the other agencies devalue photography.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Is if you want to go the route of stock, you have to look at the contract, because there are some agencies that will automatically put your work into royalty free after a certain amount of time, and right. It's in the contract, and if you don't read the fine print, you have no recourse later. So that's a good thing to say. If there aren't any other questions, I would just say thank you so much, Chris, for doing this. We're just really grateful for you giving this talk again. So thank you again.
No, thank you for having me. Thank everybody for attending, and I hope you found some value in it. And like I said, I am on Instagram and Twitter. Both of those are links to those on my website, as is my email. So if you have questions or anything like that, feel free to reach out and go take some good pictures.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.